Good evening from Westminster. If the Prime Minister had had her way, the United Kingdom would be leaving the EU in 1 hour's time. Today should have been Brexit Day. That's what Theresa May had promised. But instead, she had to watch on as MPs rejected her plans for a divorce deal with the EU once again. She told Parliament that this was their last chance to deliver the kind of Brexit people had voted for. But it wasn't enough. 286 MPs voted yes. 344 voted no. The Prime Minister lost by 58 votes. So now, April the 12th is our new Brexit Day. Either we leave with no deal or the Prime Minister asks Brussels for another extension, and it could be a long one. We may now have to take part in the European elections too, electing MEPs. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports on today's vote.
Really is such an iconic day. It is March the 29th.
What do you want? Brexit! What do you want? Now!
It is a great failure that we are not leaving at 11 o'clock this evening.
Crowds on the march to push Parliament to get on with it.
It's a thoroughly bad idea and it deserves to be defeated today.
On the day that we were due to leave, MPs asked the question, back a deal they hate or a delay. Protests brought frustration to Parliament. The Prime Minister brought the deal that would divorce us from the EU to the Commons for judgment again.
The ayes to the right, 286. The noes to the left, 344.
A closer result than last time out, but a third defeat of nearly 60 votes for Theresa May's deal, still way off.
I fear we are reaching the limits of this process in this House. This House has rejected no deal. It has rejected no Brexit. On Wednesday, it rejected all the variations of the deal on the table. This government will continue to press the case for the orderly Brexit that the result of the referendum demands.
This deal now has to change. There has to be an alternative found. And if the Prime Minister can't accept that, then she must go, not at an indeterminate date in the future, but now.
She should now go, and we should be having a general election.
Open calls for her to quit growing in her party too.
There's only one thing the Prime Minister can do. Get us out on the 12th of April, get our country back and deliver what we promised. Because if we don't, God help us.
Do you think that she should stay in her job?
No.
I think it was inevitable that what just happened was going to happen because Theresa May, once again, singularly failed to reach out to people.
The Cabinet's still trying to cling on.
We're going to have to think very hard over the next few hours how we respond to that, but this is a hugely disappointing result that's, to my mind, absolutely not in the national interest.
The Prime Minister's pitch earlier was this is the last chance to make sure we could leave the EU sometime soon.
It avoids a long extension which would at least delay and could destroy Brexit. I have said that I am prepared to leave this job earlier than I intended to secure the right outcome for our country. And when the division bell rings in a few moments' time, every one of us will have to look into our hearts and decide what is best for our constituents and our country.
This deal, even the half of it we have before us today, is bad for our democracy, bad for our economy and bad for this country, and I urge the House not to be cajoled on this third-time lucky strategy and vote it down today.
For weeks, exhausted ministers have only been able to stand back and watch on, while Brexiteers made this deal sound like the end of the world. But listen.
If we say we stand up for 17.4 million people, then we have to get those people what they asked for, is to leave the European Union, and this now is the only way.
And then another.
I will vote for the motion. The problem I have is that I cannot countenance an even longer extension. And I cannot countenance holding European elections in May.
And then another.
Most of us don't like the agreement. But it's a damn sight better than sticking two fingers up to the British public and say we can ignore you.
But a clutch of convinced Eurosceptics were firm.
We have capitulated. This is not compromise, Mr. Speaker. This has been capitulation.
And Theresa May's allies from Northern Ireland weren't budging.
Whatever means there are available to us should this agreement go through, we will continue to oppose it.
Many more were furious.
No, Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow the future of this country to be held to ransom by the never-ending internal Tory psychodrama and people who want to put their own jobs and ambitions before the jobs and ambitions of people in this country.
The rainbow of other parties were never going to say yes.
We've been ignored, silenced and sidelined. The futures of citizens across Scotland and the rest of the UK held to ransom by right-wing Brexiteers and the DUP.
This is nothing more than deceit, duplicity and deception from a government in desperation.
So what happens next? Well, tonight even members of the Cabinet aren't sure. If we know anything about Theresa May, it's not impossible that somehow she will come up with another way of trying to get her deal through again. But remember, MPs are working together behind the scenes to try to come up with a solution, probably a softer Brexit, that could find a majority in the House of Commons sometime soon. But in either case, it's likely the government will have to ask the EU for a longer extension with conditions attached. But they could say no, in which case we might leave the European Union without a deal in a couple of weeks. As they leave, on the day we were all meant to leave, the question of the country's departure from the EU is far from journey's end.
We can talk to Laura now, and MPs have voted against Theresa May's deal 3 times now. Is that it?
I think actually, Sophie, number 10 will, by hook or by crook, try to confect maybe or find another way of trying to push this deal through the nooks and crannies of Westminster, maybe outside the boundaries of what's normal. It's possible when Parliament takes control of this process, probably for a day on Wednesday next week, that the Prime Minister might put forward her deal as one of the options, one of those on a list of pick and mix that MPs will vote for and go through ticking them off one by one or giving a big cross to them. I think if we know anything about Theresa May, there is no chance whatsoever she's going to throw her hands up and say, OK, that's it, unless and until that moment is absolutely forced upon her. The reality, though, is that there are plenty of people in Parliament who are determined to try to find a different compromise, probably a closer relationship than the one with the EU that she has carefully tried to broker. And there are others in her own party who believe that that would just not be acceptable. And for that reason, and also because the European Union now has the say over whether or not we can extend this process any further, Theresa May is simply not in control of this process anymore. So she may well try again, but the eventual outcome is not up to her. But in the end, there are still some people in government in the heart of the machine. The number is getting smaller every day, but there are still some there who believe in the end a version of her deal will become what happens. Maybe not because it is the best way out, but because it's the least worst option on the table.
Laura, for now, we'll be back to you later in the programme, but for now, thank you. So EU leaders will meet again for an emergency Brexit summit on April the 10th to discuss what happens next. Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Brussels for us. And what has been the reaction there?
Well, I'd say that tonight, Sophie, Europe is on the defensive. Of course, you know, in theory, all Brexit options are still on the table, and hope hasn't died here of a negotiated Brexit deal. But there is increasing fear of a no-deal Brexit because there's very little trust in the Prime Minister and Parliament to pull off a negotiated deal. We heard warnings of a no deal today from Emmanuel Macron and other EU leaders. And this, Sophie, is no longer a negotiating tactic that they're using to put pressure on MPs to try and encourage them to vote for Theresa May's deal. They see all the ongoing divisions in Parliament on display again today in full Technicolor glory, and they wonder if the UK will ever unite around a Brexit way forward. And if the UK can't do that, then Mr Macron is wondering out loud whether there's any point in delaying Brexit for all that much longer. Now, this does not mean that if and when the Prime Minister comes here to Brussels on the 10th of April and asks EU leaders leaders for a longer extension that they will say no. But right now there is a lively debate here between the idea of a longer extension versus having a no-deal Brexit very soon. France, for one, thinks, yes, that would be painful, but it would stop all of this costly uncertainty that does cost European businesses a lot of money and weighs heavily on the workings of the EU. And all of this talk of a no-deal Brexit is making the EU also look very carefully at its own no-deal planning. And EU leaders are beginning to pile the pressure on Dublin. They want Ireland to finesse its no-deal planning for its border with Northern Ireland. So far, it's kept it rather vague for political reasons, but the EU wants to make sure that whatever happens with Brexit, its single market is protected.
Katia, thank you. So where do we go from here? Tonight there are all kinds of possibilities, from a no-deal Brexit to a closer future relationship with the EU, a long delay to a general election. Our deputy political editor John Pienaar looks at the options.
This may have been Theresa May's last chance, and she came up short. By 58 votes, MPs voted down the divorce deal she thrashed out with the EU. Plenty of battles still to come before Brexit's ever settled. But if Mrs May even hoped to regain any control, that hope probably died today. How? Tory Brexiteer resistance mostly crumbled. They feared losing Brexit altogether. Big hitters like Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, even Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said till today he'd oppose the deal so long as the Democratic Unionists did. But the hardcore stayed firm. The DUP held out, fearing Northern Ireland could be treated differently to the rest of the UK for the sake of avoiding a hard EU border with Ireland. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour MPs split. 5 reconciled to Brexit, backed the deal. Most helped sink it. So now, who's in charge? MPs and cross-party factions are working on their own plans for Brexit. Former Cabinet Minister Oliver Letwin is one of those organising a series of votes for next week, hoping most MPs can agree on one. The options? A Brexit closer to the EU than Mrs May's deal, maybe under the same customs rules, maybe under EU single market rules, so free movement of people could continue, or maybe both. That's been compared to the old European common market. A new referendum is an option, maybe tied to whatever Brexit deal is chosen in the end. And some MPs who oppose leaving with no deal and believe Parliament would never allow it prefer revoking Brexit, calling it off for now or for good. MPs could still take control, ordering the government by law to adopt the plan MPs choose. So Mrs May's next move, assuming she's around long enough, doing nothing's not an option. There'll have to be a Brexit plan made law by a withdrawal agreement bill. MPs could try to force their own plans into that bill. A softer Brexit may well have most support. Could any PM order Tory MPs and ministers how to vote or try? Government discipline has all but collapsed. The next EU summit is set for a week on Wednesday. The EU offered to delay Brexit till May the 22nd if the Prime Minister managed to get the terms of divorce through Parliament. She's failed, so the deadline is set for April the 12th. That's to allow the UK to avoid the European elections. Until there's a final agreement, a no-deal Brexit remains possible. The outcome many fear most, maybe by accident. But the EU may offer a much longer delay. What if MPs demand a new referendum? You thought Brexit was close to being settled? Think again. They say all political careers, all premierships end in failure. Most end in better shape than Theresa May's. She's on the verge of leaving number 10 with her authority shattered, the future of Brexit still in deep doubt, demands growing louder for a general election. It's fair to ask, could any leader have done much better? Either way, there's a long list of contenders keen to move into Downing Street and try.
John Pienaar there. Well, all along, businesses have been clamouring for certainty, clarity, a decision, and they've got none of that today. Our business editor, Simon Jack, is with me, and this is exactly what businesses were fearing.
I think demoralised, devastated, sick and tired are some of the comments I've heard, that their quest for certainty of some kind has founded on the parliamentary rocks yet again. Now, their biggest fear still is that we end up somehow with no deal. But I have to say, the financial markets still don't believe that is going to happen. We've seen the pound actually come back a little bit after having a wobble this afternoon. But there is going to be a delay. And although business doesn't like no deal, it doesn't like delay much less because, you know, what are they going to do in the meantime? And you heard the SMMT, the motor trade body today, saying that the UK was becoming uninvestable. And in fact, figures out today showed that business investment in the UK had fallen to its lowest level in a decade, right since the depths of the financial crisis. So along with the press releases they're getting sick and tired of releasing, it's actually really showing up in the investment decisions they're making.
Simon Jack, thank you. Well, this, of course, was supposed to be Brexit Day. To mark it, large numbers of angry protesters descended on Westminster, including the March to Leave procession, which left Sunderland 2 weeks ago. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has spent the day with people at the protests.
Brexit! Now! Let's get out! Let's have Brexit! Freedom!
Very, very sad. Very disappointed.
Democracy! Democracy! The deal's rubbish. It's not leaving.
I think it's an outrage. This is why I'm here.
They wanted it, voted for it, won it, but didn't get it.
Today was supposed to be Brexit Day. How do you sum up this day for you? How do you describe it?
It's a total and utter betrayal of democracy, whether or not you voted Remain or Leave. It is pathetic.
We were supposed to be having a party tonight. Instead, we're having a wake. What our politicians are saying to us is, shut up and sit down.
Some on this Leavers March had walked from Sunderland, determined to tell Westminster just how let down they felt.
March the 29th was not supposed to look like this, not so much a celebration, but another demonstration. And amongst the Brexiteers, a real sense of anger.
This should have been an amazing day for England, yeah? But you've ruined it. They've ruined it.
When I voted, and when they triggered Article 50, I thought today would be the day.
Do you not think that actually the politicians who wanted to get out of Europe just should have accepted the deal and then you could have been celebrating
But
today?
the deal is not leaving. The deal is worse than remaining for Leavers.
Different groups of Leavers surrounded Parliament, the ever-present demonstrators, a joint UKIP and Tommy Robinson protest, and a larger Leave means Leave rally.
We are in enemy territory. There are hundreds of people just over the streets that have treated that referendum and those that voted it with total and utter contempt.
Thousands filled Parliament Square, demands of Brexit now rejected by MPs. Just a handful of Remainers watched on.
I'm very glad that it's not Brexit Day, but I also think that it's a pity that things haven't progressed a little quicker. And you'd have thought that maybe by now that politicians could have sorted something out.
And we personally voted Remain, but we just want it finished with now, even that means leaving.
Tonight the police stood protecting Downing Street as a small group protested outside. One tried to climb the gate. This was supposed to be Brexit Day. Who knows when it will come? Lucy Manning, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, MPs returned to Parliament on Monday to try to find a way forward out of this mess. But how can it be solved? In a moment, we'll speak to our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy, who's in Belfast. But first, let's speak to our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, in Glasgow. And what role could the SNP play in trying to find a way out?
Well, the SNP are now in a very interesting position because their votes could make all the difference when MPs vote on different Brexit options on Monday. The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says that her first priority now is to try and stop Brexit entirely, something she says she believes is now a real possibility. But the SNP are also talking to other parties in Westminster about possible Brexit options. They have said all along, the SNP, that they could support a compromise where the UK does leave the EU but stays in the single market and stays in the customs union. And we know from the votes earlier this week that there is considerable support among MPs for staying in the customs union. The single market, that's a bit trickier because that's the one that means that we would have to see free movement of people from the EU continue in and out of the UK. That, though, is one of the very reasons why the SNP support single market membership. They say Scotland does need more immigration to support the economy here, so they won't go for any Brexit option that doesn't have both of those included, customs union and single market membership. But as they do keep talking to parties over the weekend and see if there is a so-called softer Brexit option that they could get behind, if they do, their 35 votes could make all the difference to giving that option a Commons majority.
And let's talk to Emma in Belfast. What about the DUP? Because it's their support that the Prime Minister has needed all the way along. She hasn't got it. Any sign that there could be some movement from them at last?
Well, I think simply the party is going to keep up the drumbeat of what it's been calling for ever since that deal first emerged. It's going to continue urging the UK government to go back to Brussels to try to get changes on the backstop. The DUP simply does not accept that the EU's position on this is unalterable. Today we saw the leader of the DUP in Westminster, Nigel Dodds, actually saying that he would now prefer to remain in the United Kingdom rather than back Theresa May's deal. And that, from a party which campaigned to leave in the referendum, is a mark of just how uncomfortable the DUP is with a deal that could potentially see Northern Ireland left in a different rules regime from the rest of the UK, something that they believe tugs away at Northern Ireland's position in the UK as a whole. Now, elsewhere, there was just growing despair, really, at that third defeat for the deal in Parliament from many people living around the Irish border. Many people here voted to remain and oppose Brexit, but they do want to see that deal go through to give them some certainty. There is so much at stake here for people's livelihoods on the island of Ireland. That is why we saw the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, say today that he would now be open to giving the UK a long extension on Brexit if the UK was to reconsider its whole approach.
Emma Vardy in Belfast, Sarah Smith in Glasgow. Thank you both. Well, let's go back now to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, and get a final word from her. I mean, Laura, we had been expecting to stand here and be counting down to 11 o'clock tonight when the UK officially left the European Union. That hasn't happened. Who knows when it will happen? It really is quite a moment.
It is, Sophie, and of course for Theresa May it was the promise that she made to the public time and time and time again. We will leave the European Union on the 29th of March. That process that she triggered was something then that Parliament itself voted for, and of course at the general election not so long ago in the long history of Britain's tangled relationships between the EU with the EU, both of the main parties committed to leaving, and then in Parliament a huge majority of MPs voted for this to happen. And at the very least, wherever blame lies, whoever made all of the different miscalculations, the fact is that Parliament has not been able to deliver to the country something that itself promised would happen. And the question marks about where next are profound. It's simply not possible tonight to predict where this might go next. And the divisions and the dilemmas tonight, years into this process now, are just as deep as they ever were. The different sides are just as entrenched as they have been all along. The Prime Minister might claim, and she's right to say, there was more support for her deal tonight than there has been for a long time. But we are so far from a resolution in any sense here, and so far for businesses, for families, for people watching us tonight, from able to being saying with any confidence exactly what the ending of this will be.
Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, thank you.